All right, this week's lesson, we're going to be working with Cinema 4D, and we're going to be making something that looks similar to this. Again, we're working with text, but we're going to do like a high quality render with the text. So we do have animation here. That's not really the focus of this lesson. If I go back to the beginning here, you can see we have a camera movement and some animation there. And it's not really the focus. We don't care that much with the animation, but we do want to continually work with setting keyframes and stuff. What we're really concerned about is lighting. We're going to be using lighting in Cinema 4D, using a camera, and then making our materials and working with reflectance and shadows, so we get that real high quality look to our renders, like we want to make it look as real as possible. So this is what we're going to be going for here. There's a lot of steps here. I'm going to go as quick as possible. If you have questions, I will answer them this week instead of just saying watch the video. But all right, so this is what we're going for. We're going to start in Cinema 4D, so let's open up After Effects. Hopefully you can hear me this week. I don't have to whisper. All right, so we open up After Effects. We're going to start a new project here. And right away, we're just going to go File, New, Max on Cinema 4D. We don't need to do anything in After Effects right now. I'm just going to save this as untitled because I'm going to save the Cinema 4D file as something different, the one I actually start working on. And I just saved this to my desktop. I would suggest saving this to a flash drive. Okay, it's going to open up Cinema 4D, and you can see right away we have these lines here, which means we need to change our render settings. So up here, render settings, edit render settings, we're going to change this to 1920 by 1080. That's standard high definition. We'll lock that ratio, and we're going to add ambient occlusion. That's just going to let the light bounce around a little bit more, make it a little bit more realistic. All right, so the first thing that we want to do, let's save this. We're going to save as high rendered text. I don't know. I'm going to save this to the desktop. You can save it to your flash drive. Okay, the first thing that we want to do, we want to get that background like this, where there's no line between the floor or the plane on the bottom and the background. It just kind of goes on forever, and we just have that endless infinity background. So to do that, we're going to go up here to the cube, click and hold, and we'll go to a plane, and that's way too small, so we're going to size that up or scale that up. Let's just say 10,000, the width and height. 10,000 by 10,000. Now we have a plane, and we're also going to bring in a background. So we click and hold and go to background. Okay, now if we render that out, if we go to our render view here, it's just gray, but you can see, I guess I should tilt it up. If I tilt that up and render it, obviously we have a clear line between the background and the foreground. So what we're going to do, first we're going to make a new material down here. So just double click in this panel here to make a new material. And then we're going to call this, double click on it to change the name. We'll call it infinite background. Okay, and then double click to change the color and stuff here. We're going to work with color first, and we're going to go into texture in this middle bar. Sorry, we're going to go to texture with this arrow, and go to gradient, You can see the gradient here is going, it's a normal gradient going from dark on one side to light on the other. We don't want that. So we're going to make, oops, sorry. We're going to change, let me go back. Right here where it says gradient, once we added the gradient, we're going to click on that to change the gradient. Right now it's in 2D U. We want to change that to 2D radial. Nope. Circular, sorry. All right, and if we left it like this isn't really what we want. It's going from a really, really dark color to a really, really light color, and it doesn't like blend well. So we're going to change these, and we're going to make the center light, and then it goes a little bit darker on the edges. So to do that, we're going to mess with these two boxes here. You can see this little box here is that black color that's in the center, and the white color here is on the edges. So we're going to double click on this little box, and we're going to make that white, and then we're going to go all the way to this side, double click on this little box, and we're going to make it like a gray. Okay, so now you can see we go from a light bright center, and it kind of slowly gradually fades to a light gray there. All right, so we're done with that. The next thing we want to do is go into reflectance, and we're going to add a reflectant here. Up here underneath where it says layers, we're going to add a reflectant, and we're going to go down to reflection legacy. And you can see if we leave it at 100%, it's hot, it's just super maxed out reflectant. It just looks like a chrome ball. That's not what we want. So we want to go and change the color. Actually, right now, we'll come back to the color. Let's just bring down the global reflection brightness up here. It's at 100%. So if we bring that down to, I don't know, 40% maybe, you can see now we're back to that like white gray color, but it's not 100% reflectant. It doesn't look like metal, and that's good. So we'll leave that at 40 right now, and we're good. Now what we want to do is drag that onto the plane and the background. So we're going to, and we can do that by clicking, holding, and dragging it right onto the plane. But let's just go up here to this panel, drop it onto the plane, and we'll drop it onto the background. So we have the same color on the plane and the background, but if we render that out, we can see we still have this line here between the background and the floor. We don't want that. So what we need to do is go up here, click on the color. See, I'm getting different options down here. If I click on background or the color that's assigned to that background, you get different options. We want to make sure that the projection on those colors is frontal, and this one is, so that's good. It's frontal. Yours might be on UVW mapping. You don't want that. So then we'll click on the plane and see this is on UVW mapping, this color here. We're going to change that to frontal. And then the last thing that we need to do is highlight both the plane and the background. And you can do that by clicking on plane, holding in shift, and clicking on background, or you can click and lasso both of those together. Then we're going to right click and add a Cinema 4D tag, go down to compositing. And we want to turn on compositing background. That's good. That should be it. So now if I render that out, you can see now we have this endless white/gray background that goes on forever. There's no distinction between the background and the floor, and that's what we want. Okay, so good. We got the background. Now we need to bring in some text. So we'll go up here to the spline logo here, click hold to bring up the options, and we'll go down to text. And there's our text showing up there. Obviously we don't want it to say text, so we're just going to change this. You can change it to whatever you want. I'm going to call it Salem in all caps. Whoops, sorry. Salem. Just click off of that somewhere. And if I scroll out, there's Salem. All right. Now if I render that out, you can see nothing shows up. That's because it's just a spline. We need to give it some sort of geometry here, so we're gonna make an extrude. So if we click and hold on the subdivision surfaces and grab an extrude, and then we're gonna take our text and make it a child of the extrude by clicking on it, holding, and dragging up to extrude until that arrow is pointing down. And there you go. Now you can see we have some 3D text, and it's a little bit reflectant here. You can see we put that reflectance on our material that we put on the floor in the background, or the plane in the background, and you can see that here, and that's good. So now what you can do here, change the font. I like impact. You can change it to whatever you want. I think impact works well as a 3D text. And if you want to space it out a little bit, like if that's too close for you, you can go to horizontal spacing. Just click and drag up, and it will give you some room between those letters. That looks pretty good. We want to make this way thicker though, so if we go to our extrude, down here under object, so we clicked on our extrude, under object we have some options here. We can see the thickness of this extrude is 20 centimeters. If we click and drag up, we can make that, let's say 50. All right, now if I render this out, you can see it looks good, and there is some difference between the light and the dark areas on the text where the light is hitting it, but it's very sharp edges. It has very sharp edges, it's very flat, and it doesn't look all that great. So what we want to do is change the caps or the edges. So if we go to our extrude, make sure our extrude is highlighted, and go to caps, and we change these from just a regular cap to fillet cap, you can see it kind of gives that rounded look. And now we just have more definition and more light. It just looks more interesting. So now we can change that. If we go to the steps here, the more steps you add, the smoother it's going to round out the edges here. So if we go up to 2, and maybe the radius is how big of a rounded edge you want. If we make that a little bit smaller, to say something like 3, you can see now the edge is like smoothed out. If we go back and show you here to the 1 and 5, there's an edge there. It's not as sharp as what it was, but it's still kind of flat. So if we put the steps up to 2 and bring this down, you can see it kind of rounds that out. And we can do that with the back too. That right now we just worked with that front edge, the front of the text. If we want, you can see the back is still very flat and sharp. So if we want to do the same thing there, and go to fillet cap 2 and bring that down to 3. Now, let's see. So if we render that out, it looks pretty good. You can see the reflection in the floor, and that looks okay. What I like to do, if you look at this example here, you can see how the center is kind of raised up. The center of this text is raised up away from the edges. I kind of like that look. You certainly don't have to do that. But to do that, all you would go down here. All you would do is go down to fillet type, and it says convex right now. And if you change that to 1 step, you can see here now it's kind of raised up from the edges. You can mess around with this if you go 2 steps. You can see it's just adding another step there. Engraved is going to push it in. Sorry, I kind of scrolled my mouse over that. If we go to engraved here, it kind of it's the opposite of 1 step. It kind of pushes it in. It looks like it's, engraved. And if I render that out, you can see we're getting some nice shadow inside here. Okay. You can see right now the plane down here is a little bit higher than where my text is sitting. So if I have the extrude highlighted, I can move that up. Oops. I don't know how I got clicked on this, but somehow I was on the axis. Right now, if this is highlighted and I move this around, I'm just changing the axes of this extrude. So if I were to rotate it and the axis was over here, it would rotate around this spot. If I wanted to rotate like in the center, I could move this here and it would rotate around the center. But I just want to move this object, so we're going to make sure to click off of that. And now with extrude highlighted, I can move this up so that it's resting right on the ground there. Okay, and you can see it's still cutting into my S a little bit. Whoops, I had the plane highlighted. And that's a little too high, so the curve of this S might go down a little bit past where the other letters go. You can see there's a shadow underneath that. Really doesn't matter for what we're going to do, because we're going to put this text on its side. We're going to really work with the 3 dimensions here, the capabilities of this 3D program. I'm going to change this from engraved back to, let's try 2 steps here. Okay, now what we want to do is lay this text on its side, just to make it a little bit more interesting here. So with extrude highlighted, I'm going to grab my rotation tool up here. And then if I want to do this, if I want to try and eyeball it up, I can just grab on this red axis and rotate it down, and my Cinema 4D froze there. For some reason, whenever you grab the rotation tool, I don't know if it's because it's Cinema 4D Lite, but it has a tendency to freeze up. You can see I can't really do anything there. So I'm going to save and then X out of it, go back to After Effects, new Maxon Cinema 4D project. It says Untitled. I'm going to hit save, and then you can see I already have one that's called Untitled. So it says, do you want to replace it? Yes, doesn't matter. And now from Cinema 4D, I'm going to open up the high rendered text file that I was working on. Okay, it's a little bit better. All right, so like I said, we want to try and rotate this. It might freeze a couple more times. So we're going to click on rotate, and when I click on rotate, like I said, I can either grab this red axis and try and rotate it myself, like this, and try and get it right on 90. That might be very difficult. You can see 90.1. That's not exactly 90. If I hit Control Z to undo that, and it froze again. So I'm going back to After Effects, replace that, yes, and I'm going to open it up again. To fix that problem, if you click on the axes that you want to rotate it around, click on it first and then hit Shift. So click and hold on whatever axis you're rotating, and then hit Shift and rotate it. It's going to go by increments of 10. It's going to make it a lot easier. Now we have it on 90. And if I click, now I'm done rotating that, so I want to click off of that back to the Move tool and move it up until it's sitting flush on the ground. You can see it's kind of underneath the plane. If I go underneath there, you can see it through the ground. So I'm going to move this up till it's resting on the ground. Now, this angle obviously doesn't look very interesting, so I'm going to find an angle that does look interesting. We'll change this once we get the camera. Once we put the camera in here. And now if I render this out, you can still see the reflectance here. It's not as great as when it was standing straight up and down, but you can see the reflection of the letters in the floor there. And we have some shadowing. We're gonna do a lot more shadowing here when we add lights, but so there we go. We have some text on its side. Now let's add a material to this text here. So if I go down to my materials panel here, double click to add a new material, and we're going to call this Salem. So I know that this color is the color for the word Salem. Double click to change the properties there, and we're going to make it red. So if I go make sure color's highlighted here, go to this little square and double click on it, I can change this color, and we'll change it to a really bright red. And now I want to go to reflectance because I want this material to be kind of reflectant like the floor, and add a reflectant. We're going to add reflection legacy. Now if I go down to color here and change it to that same red, you can see if I leave it at 100%, it's super reflectant. So if I were to put that on the text and render that out, it is highly reflectant here. You can see in the M here, it's reflecting the E there, and if we were to put objects in front of this, it would reflect it like a mirror almost. So that looks kind of cool. I don't want the reflection to be that much. So if we go back to the reflection brightness, you can see it changing a little bit up here when I move this. This is what it's going to preview what your color is going to look like. So if I change that to, I don't know, 60. So it should have just automatically changed. We can still see that reflection of the E. It's not as much as it was, but we're going to leave it like that for now. Okay, now what we want to do is really crank up. Let's get some more shadows going in here. And the way we do that, right now we're just using a default light that the program has built in so that we can, when we render this out, we can see something. And you can see, because we have ambient occlusion on and we have some reflectance on our materials, it takes a little bit of time to render, and it's really going to take a lot of time to render once we put some lights in here and some animation. It's going to take a long time to render, but that's just the nature of working with the 3D program. So what we're going to do now is let's bring in some lights. So we're going to go up here to this light bulb and just click it. It's going to bring in a regular light, and that's fine. And we're going to set up some 3-point lighting. So let's rename these here. Let's call this the key light. Remember, the key light's going to be like the main light. And now we can move it, make sure the key light is highlighted, and we can move this light around by dragging these axes. So we're going to bring it up a little bit and out a little bit. There we go. And we're going to leave the brightness down here. You can see all these options we have with our lights. We can even tint the light a little bit, like if we made it, I don't know, this, we messed around and we made it red, gave it a red tint, and we rendered that out. The light is going to be, and it's not going to look as good as red light bouncing off a red object here, but the tint of that light is going to be red. We're not going to do that. We're going to leave that white there, and if we go up here and get a, we can bring up different views by clicking on this button in the top right hand corner. If we do that, now we have the view that we were just in. We have a view from the top, and a view from the right side, and a view from the front. We just want to, you can change, you can move things around a little bit easier when you get into the different views. So we're going to make this key light off to the left here. We're going to leave it pretty close, and we're going to go back to the view that we're on. You just click in the top right hand corner of whatever view you want to see, and it'll go full screen. So if we go back up here and click on this to get back to full screen. We're going to leave that key light at 100% intensity because we want that to be the brightest light. And we're going to bring in another light because it's 3-point lighting. We're going to call this the fill light. We'll double click on that to change the name and call it fill light. And we're going to bring that, we're going to zoom out a little bit. We're going to bring that out here. We're going to keep this one low. Let's keep the fill light a little bit low. Move that key light up. Okay. And then the fill light isn't as intense, so we're going to move it off here to the side. See if I turn this off. There you go. You can see the difference that the fill light's making. And if I render this out with just the key light on, and then turn on the fill light and render it out, you can see the difference that it's making there. So under the fill light, we're going to bring the intensity of that light down to 50% because it's not going to be as strong as, let's make it 55%, not going to be as strong as the fill or the key light. And then for 3-point lighting, we need one more light. We're going the headlight or the rim light or the, I don't know what you want to call it. We're going to bring that in, another light, and we'll call it rim light. And we're just going to put that right above. Maybe move it back a little bit. If we go into our top views, you can see, let's put it right over the E. Good. And if we turn the rim light off, you can see the difference it's making. Let's bring the intensity down a little bit to 75%. All right, now let's zoom back in here, find an interesting angle, and render. Okay, that's pretty good. It's a pretty good, well-lit scene there. But what we don't have are these shadows. Like if you look back at the render, that I did here, you see these shadows. We don't have those right now. We have to tell these lights, we have to say that we want the lights to create shadows for some reason. So if we just do that with all 3 lights here, I wonder if we can do it by highlighting all of them. Yeah. So if you highlight all those lights, so you can do it in one shot and go down to shadow here under general. And we're just going to make it area shadows. Let's try shadow maps off first. See what that does. If I render that out, it's kind of diffusing the shadows a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of that. All right, so we'll go back, highlight all of them, and change it to area. And now, if I render that out, yeah, the shadows are a little bit harder there. That's good. And if you don't like the shadows that your object, and you can see how long now that it takes to render. If you don't like the way that those shadows are being cast on your object, you can just move the lights. Move the lights around. So, and we might do that if I go up to my top view and go to key light and move it over to the side. Grab that fill light. Just play around. Just play around with where the lights are. It's going to change the shadows a little bit. Okay, still not a huge fan of the way that looks, and again, this is just your personal preference, so you can mess around with it whatever way you think is best. Still looks kind of the same there. I think that it's the rim light that's making those shadows something that I'm not a fan of. Anyways, we're gonna leave that for right now. Okay. So now what we want to do, if we want to animate this thing, you can see down here in our timeline, if we move the playhead around, there's no animation, it's not doing anything. It's right now set for 90 frames, which is 3 seconds, 30 frames per second. We want to bring in a camera so that we can animate, we can start recording the animation of the text. So if we click on camera, right now we're not in our camera. If we want to see what our camera is seeing, we would click here, and wherever we set up where we're looking at it here, by moving around with these controls up top, if whatever we're looking at, whenever we click here, camera object, now we're in our camera. Okay, so now when we move it around, we're moving our camera around. And this is important because let's say we have our scene set up like we want it to start right here, but we want to change the lights or something, or we want to move some objects around. We can jump out of our camera, and now we're not, if we go down here, we want to see it from like behind for some reason, we're not affecting what that camera is seeing. So if we jump back in our camera, it's going to go back to where we left it. So important to note, like when you're messing around trying to fix something in a scene or change something with your object or something, you might want to hop out of your camera so that you don't mess up that perfect angle that you got. Okay, so we're going to jump into our camera here. We're going to change this view to like a lower angle. All right. And we're going to set some keyframes. So if we take the playhead and move it out 30 frames would be 1 second. If we go out to, let's say 60 frames, and this is what we want it to look like at the end of the animation. So if we click on our extrude and go to coordinates, you can see we can move the object around on these different axes. We can move it up and down, and I'm just hitting Control Z to undo these, left or right, forward or back. What I'm going to do is let's animate it coming up from the floor. So if I set a keyframe here, and make sure our extrude is highlighted because that's what we're animating. Set a keyframe on the y-axis, that's the up and down vertical axis. At 60 frames, you can see it just set a little keyframe there, a little blue box. And now I want to move this back to 0 and move this, go to the y-axis and move it below the floor so you can't see it. And then click this again to set another keyframe. Now if I hit play, it's going to rise up from the floor over 2 seconds. And if we say that's a little too slow, we can grab this keyframe by clicking on the blue box and moving it closer. Say we want it over 1 second. And now that animation happens twice as fast. All right, so now let's move that back to 2 seconds. This button here will go back to the start of your scene, or if you just let it play, once it gets to 90 frames, it's just going to start back over. All right, so there's some basic animation there. Now what we want to do, we want to animate this camera so that the view, if you look at the one that I made earlier, see how the camera is moving as the text is coming up, and then the Quaker's text pops up as well. So we want to animate this camera. All right, we have the camera in scene. Right now, this is the view that the camera is looking at. It's stationary, it's not moving. But just like we did with the extrude, we can set keyframes to where we want the camera to move. All right, so if we go, let's start this here at 0, put the playhead back at 0. Actually, let's start it at 60 so that we can see where these letters are. I'm just going to move my camera a little bit right now. You can see I'm in my camera. So when I move it, it's moving the view of the camera. All right. Let's get a low angle here. All right, so this is where it's going to start. All right. So now let's make sure our camera is highlighted. And in coordinates, let's just set a keyframe at the beginning. We'll go drag our playhead back to 0. Set a keyframe for the x-axis, the y, the z, the h, and let's do this. All of them except this last one here. All right. So this is where it's going to start. Now we want to drag it out to 60. And we're going to, let's just change the angle here so we can zoom in. Basically, we're just telling it at the end of this 2 seconds where we want the camera view to be. All right. So let's see how this does. All right. So we just changed from over on the starting on the left, and this is where we want it to end up. So now we have to set the keyframes there. So let's click it again for all of those because we changed the parameters for all of those points. And if we drag it back to the beginning now and hit play, you can see that's really, really fast. So maybe with the camera selected, if we want to drag that out to 90 frames, so it happens over 3 seconds. It's a little better. And if you need more than 3 seconds, let's say you want your animation to be more than 3 seconds, right here you can go up or down. So let's say we want it to be 5 seconds. So let's make it 150. And now, currently it's only showing you 63 frames, right? So if I hit play, it's only going to go to 63 frames and then start over. We can just click and drag this out so it's showing the entire timeline. And now let's take that camera animation and drag it out to 130, 120, so 4 seconds. And hit play. Okay. Now, if you want to change this, say you don't like where it ended up, just drag your playhead over that last keyframe there, right on 120, and we're still in our camera, so we're going to change the view to something like that, and then we have to go back and set these keyframes. If I drag the playhead back, it's a little bit better. Let's say when it's flying over here, you want the letters to be more in the center. You could go to this point and set a keyframe where you move the camera I don't know, back like that, and then set a keyframe for all these points. And now we have, now it's going to go from this starting point to here and then go to our third frame. All right, so if we play that, so keyframing it, I mean, it's really, it might take a little bit of time for you to get the exact shot that you want, but it's very customizable. All right, so that looks good. Let's render this out and see what the final view is. You can see those letters are very reflective. So I think what I want to do is jack up the reflectance of the floor and maybe turn down the reflection or the reflectance of the text. And again, this is just personal preference. So if I go back in here and go to, sorry, global reflection brightness and turn that down, I don't know, let's do 25%. And then I go back in here and jack up the reflection of the floor to 70% maybe. Let's see what that does. You can see we're getting a lot more reflection off the floor than we were. The reflectance on the text isn't as great. There's still a lot though. So you can mess around with that. We're getting, the shadows are offsetting that reflection a little bit from our lights, which is fine. Okay, so that's good. Now we're just going to throw in another word there to kind of make it more interesting. So we'll go back up to our spline, click and hold and go to text, and we'll go into the object of the text, the object. We're going to change the text. So highlight text. We're going to put this as Quakers. Oops. Sorry. Text. Change it to Quakers. Click off of there. And we're going, so it's way too big, right? If we move this out in front, it's way too big. To make it smaller, we'll go under height. We're going to bring down from 200 centimeters to right about there. Let's say 140. And we're going to, let's bring it down a lot more. Let's bring it down to 100. Let's throw an extrude in here so we can see the letters a little bit better. So under subdivision surfaces, extrude, and then we're going to make the text a child of that extrude. So we have some 3D-ness to it. And then click on the extrude. I don't like how thick those letters are, so I'm going to bring that down to like 10. And I'm not a huge fan of the font, so if we go back to the actual text and not the extrude, if we click on the text, we can change that font from that to, I don't know, something interesting. How about Rockwell? All right, let's do that. Now we want to space these letters out a little bit. So under text, horizontal spacing, we're going to jack that up. And you can see that the Q is under it. The floor cuts off the Q. The Q is a tough letter because if we move everything up here, so if we click on this extrude and move it up to where the Q is touching the ground, now all the other letters are off the ground. So you get something like this where the shadow, you can see the shadow underneath, which is fine. just that Q kind of screws things up because the bottom of the Q is a lot lower than the bottom of the other letters, but that looks kind of cool, I guess. I like it. I like it. Let's make these even smaller. Let's make the Quakers text a little bit smaller. We go from 100, bring it down to like 65. And then we can spread out the horizontal spacing a little bit more. All right, something like that. Now let's throw some material onto the Quakers text, and we're gonna just double click there and call it Quakers. So we keep everything organized, double click, let's change the color. Let's try black. So if I click on color, double click in here and go to black and add some reflectance on it. We're gonna add that reflection legacy. We don't want it to be a chrome ball, so if we click down here in this box and make it black, I think black's going to be a very good color to work with reflectance. Yeah, when something's pure black, it's not going to show the reflectance as well. So let's make it a gray. I think that's why I did that in the first one that I did. Okay, let's see. Change this to like 50, the global reflection brightness to 50. Let's try that. So click, hold, and drag this onto the extrude. Let's see what that looks like. It's not bad. I like it. I don't like it as much as like the silver, the kind of chromy looking color. You can see now we're getting this reflection from the red text in the black. You can see some red highlights in here, and that's kind of cool. We don't see like the letters as clear in the floor, so I don't like that as much. Still looks kind of cool, but I'm going to change it. Certainly up to you though. Let's try, whoops, Control Z. If I go to color and change this to a gray, let's try that. And let's jack the reflectance up a little bit. 75. All right, so now what we have to do is animate that Quakers text, because if we don't, it's just going to be standing. It's going to be sitting there the whole time. Now you can see, we can see the letters a little bit better in the floor. And that looks good to me. Again, I'm not a huge fan of these shadows, and that's only because that stupid Q. If we move this down, if we move the text extrude down, the Q is not going to look very good, but now you can see we've eliminated that, like, I don't know, that shadow being so dark underneath the Quakers text. We can see the reflection from the Salem text a little bit better. I don't know. It looks better to me, except that Q is buried in the ground. All right, let's animate this text and be done with it here. So right now, if I went back to the beginning of the scene, you can see Quakers is still there because I haven't animated it. So if I play that, and that, I mean, you might like that. I don't know, but this is a very easy fix. If let's click on the Salem extrude. We should name these, by the way. This is Salem, and this is Quakers. We click on the Salem extrude. go back to where the animation, or let's click on the camera. The animation stops at 120. So this is where we want it to be at 120. I'm just going to pull that cue up because that's going to bother me. So if this is where we want the animation to stop, we're going to click on the coordinates of the word Quakers, set keyframes for all these positions, and then we're going to move the timeline back. And we can move it back to, like, I don't know, move it back to 100, and we're gonna bring it down. I guess the only keyframe we needed to set was the y-axis. So if we bring it down underneath the floor, set another keyframe, we might want to move that to where the camera stops. So if the camera stops there, we can take this keyframe and move it to 140, and this keyframe and move it to 115, let's say. There we go. Maybe we want it to, that's good, that's good. So if we go back to the beginning and play that now. There you go. And again, a lot of this stuff is your preference here, how thick the letters are, where the lights are placed for the shadows, what kind of materials and how reflectant they are. You can kind of play around with all that stuff. But right now it's good. I'm going to hit File, Save, and we're basically done here. So now if we want to close out of, well, let's just minimize Cinema 4D, go back into After Effects, get rid of all these untitled Cinema 4D files and double click, and we're going to bring in that high rendered text, the one we were just working on. And if we drop that into a new composition, so click, hold, and drag it down here in a new composition. Now you can see it's showing up with a green background and it looks really bad, very pixelated. So if we go up here under render settings and where the renderer says software, we're going to change that to standard final. And then you can still see there's a difference between the floor and the background. So we're going to go, we can close out of these controls for the Cinema 4D file and right click on our Cinema 4D file, the high resolution text, and go down to interpret footage and go to main and just hit ignore. There you go. So now if we move this playhead out to 3 seconds, it'll take a while to render. And I'm only showing it a third. There you go, you can see what it looks like here. Now, if you want to render this out, like if you wanted to see what it looks like, you can hit the space bar and it will take a long time. It'll start rendering that frame by frame, and then you can let the green line go a little bit until you start seeing some stuff. Once you render it out, if you don't, as long as you don't make any changes to it, then you can hit the space bar and see that animation, what it looks like in a final resolution. There you go, you can see we're 10 frames in, and now we start to see the text come up from the floor. And you can do that, but if that's all you wanted to do, you wanted to render that out, you wanted to save it, you're just going to go up to composition here, add to render queue, and this is where you can determine what the name of it is. Right now we have it saved as high rendered text. If you click on that, you can determine where you want to save that. So if I want to save that to my desktop, boom, and then you just hit render. Now I did this, the one that I showed you, this one here, I did this last night and it took 2.5 hours to render. So if you do want to render this out because you want to use it into a Premiere file or something like that, at the end of the day we can just put your laptop on top of the cart with it plugged in and we can render that out. Alright, but that's pretty much it. There's could be a lot of uses for this. And now what you could do is make this without a background in Cinema 4D, and then you can drop this onto video. So like you could have, and that's like a cool look that a lot of people are doing now. They're putting 3D text in live video, like on the ground somewhere. And you can do that. You just wouldn't make a background here. So, but if you wanted this to be like an intro to one of your videos or something to put on the board, it's certainly a cool look for you. So there you go. Once you're done with this, just show me. You could just show me in Cinema 4D if you're not rendering it out for anything. You could just show me this file and you can play it. And we could go to the render view at the end of your animation just to see what it looks like. All right. So once you're done, show me that, and you'll be done.